guess we should start the conversation by saying sports have officially returned, with baseball returning, basketball back, hockey's just getting back, and the NFL seems to be on its way too. So,
Hopefully.
yeah, hopefully. With that, I wanted to talk about stoppages in sports. This is arguably the biggest stoppage of professional sports in the history of mankind, basically.
You had all the sports gone, all of them, and it's just
Yeah, I mean,
what I don't even think there's been a time where all of them have been gone at once like this.
with that, I think we got to talk about some of the stoppages that have happened in sports. And now, when I say stoppages, I mean for an extended periods of time. Games that have been canceled due to unfortunate circumstances happening a night before don't really count. Like, for example, in 2016, I believe, when Jose Fernandez unfortunately passed away, the Marlins canceled their game that day when they found out, and then played the following day. But stuff like
Right.
that,
Yeah. That kind of
unfortunately, has
stuff.
happened before, so it doesn't count. For me, these rules apply to work stoppages, stoppages due to unforeseen events, and we'll get to a number of them here in the next year. And also has to be like has to be like pretty much all the teams getting affected. It can't just be like one or two teams getting affected, although some are affected more than others, such as in the first stoppage I want to talk about. We'll start in baseball. The first one came in 1972. The first major league strike came in 1972, and it canceled 86 games after owners and players, of course, couldn't come to an agreement on certain issues, such as a $500,000 agreement in pension fund. And what happened here is the games were missed over a 2-week period. Teams lost games in their season because these games were never made up. For example, the Astros and Padres played 9 less games at 153 than the average team that year.
Were they even in the thick of it that year, though, is the question?
Well, no, I mean, considering they were young teams, I think they were pretty, out of it by then.
Yeah.
But this is a huge factor. For example, the Detroit Tigers played one more game than the Boston Red Sox did last year, and the Tigers finished at 86-70 compared to the Red Sox at 85-70, which allowed Detroit to win the American League East that year. And that takes you to 1981. And there were stoppages actually in 73, 76, and 80, but those were happening outside of the season. They didn't have any effect on the year. 1981, the strike begins on June 12th and forces the cancellation of 713 games, and that's 38% of the average MLB schedule. Before, this was based on unresolved free agent compensation, and actually the owners were primarily blamed for it, even though it was the players who went on strike that season. The 1981 All-Star Game was delayed that year, played at Municipal Stadium in Cleveland. The game was played on August 9th after an agreement was reached on July 31st, and the regular season was resumed that following day. I believe the strike started the strike started on May 29th.
Okay.
So we basically missed about 2 months of the whole season. But one interesting thing that this led to was the development of an expanded playoff format, because on August 6th of that year, the league decided to make the second half of the season a split season comparison to the first. So whoever were the division winners that year got to play in a best-of-5 division series, the first of its kind, and the winners of that played in the league championship series that same season.
Yeah. Now remind me, was this just 3 teams with the 2 and 3, the second and third best teams playing, and then they play the first team, or was it 4 teams total?
No, basically I believe it was they took. Wait, yeah, how would that work? It was going to say, let me just look this up here. It says here, the owners decided to split the 81 season into 2 halves with a wild card team if the same club won both periods of play, meeting in a best-of-5 divisional playoff series known as the League Division Series. Then the 4 survivors of that would move on to the best-of-5 League Championship Series. So I think it is the first and second place teams from each period of the season.
Mm-hmm.
But think about that. That was during when 2 teams would win their divisions, go right to the championship series, and then whoever won that best-of-5 series went to the World Series.
Yeah. I mean, I like these 8 to 10 team playoff. That's so much better because you have so many great teams that get left out sometimes. Like, what was it? You had a 90-plus win Tribe last year. Year before that, wasn't it Tampa Bay, I believe? And just you've got some good teams that get left out of these.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder how last season could have been affected by a system like this. You look at a team like Washington, who started out the year so poorly and then got on such a hot streak. But even then, who would have known if they would have been able to be affected by it? I believe it was Cincinnati who had the overall best record, but because they never finished in the right seeding both times, they didn't make it into the postseason. I might be wrong on that, though. Yeah, here it is. To make matters worse, the Cincinnati Reds and St. Louis Cardinals each failed to make the playoffs, despite the fact that they both had the two best full season records for the National League that season and would have won their division under normal circumstances. However, the Cardinals would get vindicated by winning the World Series the following year.
I mean, you do it your own way.
That occurs. So 72 and 81. The season stops. Players miss some games, but, it's not too bad. You eventually get back in. And then 1994 comes around.
Jeez.
It is one of the most – I think baseball fans have already heard everything there is to say about it. It's one of the most notorious labor relation discussions in the history of the game. And that
Montreal gets screwed. You have so many other teams just – I mean, it's a whole freaking dumpster fire, and it makes – I'm not sure, if what we went through with the whole COVID thing, for those who may watch this in the future, was worse than this. I'm not sure anymore.
Well, I mean, depending on what happens in the near future, if we have a postseason this year, it'll be more than what happened in 94, because for the first time in 90 years, there was no World Series. There was no postseason, no World Series winner. They just canceled the season. And that leaked over into 1995 because the season was reduced from 162 to 144.
And hey, would you look at that? The Indians make it to the World Series in 95.
I think they're the only team to win 100 or more games in a season that lasted less than 154, like the original mark. It shows how good they were. But that's all it is for baseball. So the NFL, it seems like their labor relations have been kind of more recent in terms of just like stagnant stoppages over the years. I mean, we saw what happened. We'll get to that in a second. But they had a couple of things in the late 60s and early 70s, but it was always in the off season. And then in 1982, a strike during the season lasted for 8 weeks, which forced the season to be shortened from 16 games to 9.
Yeah, owners were not happy about that.
I mean, the strike occurred because the union demanded that a wage scale based on percentages of gross revenues be implemented. And the NFL wanted, the players union wanted it to be 55%, but the NFL wasn't having that. During the strike, the NFLPA had 2 AFC, NFC All-Star games that season. The strike ended with the players' revolt against their own union, with some members suggesting that Ed Garvey, who was their executive director of the PA, that he should step down. So they reduced it from 16 games to 9. The playoffs were expanded, 16 teams. That would actually not be the last labor strike of the 80s, however, because in 87, a strike which lasted for 24 days forced the 87 season to be shortened by 1 game. So nothing, I mean, really one thing was affected, but not much.
Yep. Basically, sweep it under the rug.
Players were dissatisfied with their compensation, and they just decided, hey, we're going to go on strike. I mean, you obviously notice a theme, a pattern here. It's players and owners not being able to come together over financial issues.
Money talks, and we've seen that recently too.
Yeah, especially in 2011, which 2011 is arguably the worst of the lockouts, and nothing even came of it except for the cancellation of the Pro Football Hall of Fame game. And there was a lot of people that really thought that it was going to leak into the regular season. Alas, nothing ever came of it.
I mean, I wouldn't blame people because that thing dragged on forever. I remember even being on vacation in Chicago, and there's still being like the day counter or whatever of the lockout, and it was just like reaching a crazy high number at that point. And you had all the players getting drafted during the lockout.
So the NBA has actually done a very good job in terms of labor relationships between their players and owners. However, in 1998, this was one of the most notorious seasons in the NBA, where the lockout lasted for 6 months and forced the season to be cut to 50 games per the year. That led to a lot of teams, a lot of players showing up out of shape, and the hierarchy of the league was out of whack. The New York Knicks became the first ever 8 seed to make the NBA Finals that year because things were just so out of place, kind of like what baseball is kind of going through right now. Anybody could win at that point. However, because of this season, a dynasty was potentially, I mean, not potentially, it was kind of born by the San Antonio Spurs winning their first NBA championship. So out of the nonsense that came out of that season, a team that had been kind of on the lower rung of the NBA for years birthed themselves to be now one of the highest class teams in the association.
Yeah. I mean, did they draft Duncan heading into that
Duncan was
year?
drafted. Duncan was drafted in '97, and I think that was the same year where it's notorious that Boston had been trying to tank for
Yeah.
Duncan for the last few months of the season, had great odds to get him, and they just didn't. They didn't get him. San Antonio won the lottery that year.
I had thought that they'd won one title at least before they got Duncan before
No, they had
before
never
that
even made.
injury happened.
They had never even made the finals before that. The closest I think they got was in '79, I think, when George Gervin was in town with the Iceman, and they lost in the conference finals. I believe it might have been to the Bullets. I believe, I'm not sure though. And also, I think 95. I think they were in the playoffs with Houston. That might have been the conference finals, and David Robinson got. I mean, I love him, but he got eaten alive by Olajuwon in that year in the postseason, and then of course the Rockets won. But of course, another lockout happened in 2011, kind of similar to what the NFL was going through. We really forget that two major leagues were in like heated lockdown discussions that season, and also a third one around the same time. But the NFL wasn't affected. The NBA was affected.
That season was something else, man.
Lockout started July 1st, 2011, and ended in early December 2011, which caused the season to be cut from 82 games to 66, and they had to start the year on Christmas.
I mean, it's not too bad to have a start on Christmas. We might be faced with that. Who knows this year? Not because, because of a lockout, but because of a virus.
Yeah, that's true. I think I want to look up the team record. I think this actually is the year one of the worst teams in NBA history ever was pedaled down into a site. Yep.
Yeah, Chicago lost to Philly, I think, right?
No. That's not even that. I don't even know. Chicago and Philly. What are you talking about?
Bulls lost Rose. Philadelphia beat the.
Oh no. I'm not talking about that. That did happen that year though, because Thibodeau just likes to keep his players in for however long he wants for some reason. The 2011-2012 Charlotte Bobcats.
Oh, that's right.
Won 7 games and finished and lost 59. That is, by technicality, the worst team in the NBA history because they won the fewest amount of games that year.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as the 10-72 Dallas Mavericks, but or not. I don't even know what that 10-72 record. Let me look that up.
Didn't the 76ers go like 9-73 or something like that a few years ago before they actually started winning?
I think they were in danger of hold on a sec, worst NBA teams? Did they go 9-73?
I want to say they did, but I'm not certain.
No, they went 10-72. Yeah, no, you're right and you're wrong. Okay, I'm going to go through. We're going to take a break from this whole thing because I'm going to leave this discussion in. Some of the worst teams in history. The Bobcats were on there, 7 wins, 59 losses. The 98-99 Vancouver Grizzlies, who we
dang. Yeah, that's a throwback.
8 wins, 42 losses, which, compared to Charlotte's isn't as bad. Denver in 97-98, 11-71. Philadelphia in 2015 and 16, 10-72. And the 72-73 Sixers, by a full season's definition, are the worst team ever at 9-73. So you had the right team, you had the wrong season, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even say the season, did I?
You thought it was no, I said
I thought that the worst team overall was a 9-73 76ers team. Didn't the 76ers go like 9-73 or something like that a few years ago?
Now I'll go over to the National Hockey League, which is getting back into play. 92 was the first ever year a labor strike occurred, which postponed 30 games of the 91-92 season.
94-95 and 2011 seem to hold a lot in common, especially with the 94-95 lockout, which canceled many games, the All-Star game, and shortened the regular season to 48 games per team with no interconference games.
48
What is
games.
it about those 2 years, 94, 95, and then 2011.
What was that early 90s era where I think there were a lot more labor discussions than you would have normally seen in past decades. And I think discussions got a little more heated as revenues really got boosted up in that era. I mean, you were seeing some crazy contracts in sports like never before, and players are starting to get a little more power over teams. And it's so normal to us now. It's so normal for us to see 8-figure, 9-figure deals be kind of peddled out like it's candy. But these were some serious discussions that had to be had back then. And I'm not even talking about more than contracts. It was just getting the players what they wanted and having the owners being able to give it to them. Well, you mentioned the 95 season had to cancel the All-Star game, had to shorten the season to 48. That's literally almost exactly what they did in 2012 when they had their labor disputes. I mean, they basically did the exact same thing. Cancel the All-Star game, shorten the regular season to 48, no interconference games before going right into the postseason.
And I think we're skipping over here the 05 or 04, 05. Oh,
yeah, I was about to say the worst out of all of them by far, by all of sports, is a season that didn't even occur because in 2004, the lockout started in September, and it had to lead to the entire season getting canceled in February because nothing was resolved by then. It was so late into the year that even if they wanted to fix it, they couldn't. It was just so late. They finally reached an agreement over almost a year later in July of 2005. So a season that didn't even occur is probably the worst sin that can happen for a professional sports league.
Basically.
Especially for something like that. Like this year, if leagues are affected, it's kind of understandable because people are getting medically affected. This was just a bunch of guys being like, hey, I want this. And they're like, no, we can't give this to you.
I mean, just with this year alone, it's been crazy because we never thought we'd see MLB players and owners fighting like they did. The NFL luckily had some things happen where they were able to smooth things out because I was ready to see them royally and catastrophically up. I would have been more amused by that to just see what would have went down because knowing the league, I was going to just be ready to trash them. The NBA is the one that I was always most confident in because Adam Silver has always been a very good commissioner. And then the NHL, which I don't have much interest for, but know that Gary Bettman is not much better than Goodell.
That was mostly, those were all labor disputes that we talked about. And I should also mention one big one in hockey. I'm going to lead the non-work stoppages list off with a medical issue. About a century before we had to deal with this virus, the Spanish flu outbreak caused the 1919 Stanley Cup Finals to be canceled in the middle of the finals.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know about this?
I had not heard about it. No.
So the NHL back then used to play the Stanley Cup against the PCHA, and it was between the Montreal Canadiens and the Seattle Metropolitans, who that was not the new name of the new team that came about. It was now the Kraken. Mm-hmm. I was kind of hoping it would be the Metros, but to each his own. The series was canceled when the teams were tied 2-2 in the series, and there had been one tie in the run already. The sixth game of the series was canceled after multiple players in each team contracted Spanish flu and fell ill, and the Canadiens manager George Kennedy was later hospitalized and later died from never recovering from the flu. The Stanley Cup that year says 1919 Montreal Canadiens Seattle Metropolitan series not completed.
Right. How long was the MLB season delayed because of 9/11? Remind me.
I was just going to get to that. So September 11th affected all sports when it first hit. It cut the MLB season from the 11th to the 17th. They resumed play. It was actually shorter than I had remembered it being for some reason. But that led to the postseason getting pushed back further. And in turn, that was the first ever World Series between New York and Arizona that was played in November.
And then, I forget, did any sports leagues cancel their games because of JFK back in '63?
No, I don't think I don't believe so. I could probably look that up, and then if there was, we could edit it. It might have been like a game might have been canceled. Like maybe the Senators game got canceled that night or something. I don't know. In other sports that we can talk about, for example, the PGA Tour. The PGA has been affected many times by World War I and II. The U.S. Open was canceled from 1917 to 1918 and from 42 to 45 because of the wars. The PGA Championship and the Masters were the only tournaments during that time to conduct while the U.S. was involved in the war after Pearl Harbor. However, the PGA Championship was canceled in 43 during the heat of the whole thing, and in 1917 and 18. And the Open Championship, once those world wars hit, because pretty much all the world wars were on international soil, once those wars hit, there was no Open those years. And actually, the British Open has been canceled a number of times for other reasons, including in 1871. No trophy was available for the tournament because young Tom Morris, had retired the famed challenge belt that used to be given. It's not the claret jug. It was the challenge belt nowadays, kind of like a WWE thing. Under Open rules, the belt was his property after having won 3 consecutive titles. Like he was just allowed to keep the whole thing.
Sounds fair.
I mean, the claret jug wasn't even introduced until 1872, and then, of course, young Tom won it again. Yeah, every year that a world war occurred, except for 1914, I believe, which is right before the war started, I think, the Open was canceled. Those are all the times that sports have really come to a halt, not including this year, obviously. And that was just us kind of slapdashing together our summary of every time it happened. So here is to hoping that we will not see any major stoppages anytime soon, even though there are some reports that are not pleasant to hear.
Lockout. Locked out.
All right, so I think that is it. Be sure to follow Sean on all of his stuff. Be sure to follow me on all of my stuff. I'll be back with more videos very soon. Yeah, all right. See you guys.
All right, later.